Okay, this is part two in this, and I backed it up just a couple of seconds. We were at the point of showing that there were black slave masters too, and so on. In fact, Kamala Harris, everybody tried to claim her as black and so on, and she came out and said that she was of Indian heritage on a few different interviews. Of course, that was back whenever she totally lost the bid and got kicked off of it. Nobody was even going to let her even be part of the party anymore. But then Joe Biden chose her. Boy, it's hard to believe Joe was even in the race with his known lying whenever he tried it back in the 80s and got caught, repeatedly, to where he just dropped out. But somehow people forgot about that, and Obama grabbed him. Everybody, we just let that go on through, boy, and then now we've got corn pop, don't we? But let's continue here about black slavery and so on.
Plantations and over 200 slaves. Oh yeah, did you all know that we had black slave owners here in America? Let's discuss that. Contrary to popular belief, all white people in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century did not own slaves.
Oop, that's a weird narrative, because you're taught to believe that they did. Well, yeah, the English people didn't have anything really to do with that too either, but you want to make it so, but they're the ones that freed you and made the Underground Railroad and everything. And also they made everything that's around you today, every single thing. But that's, I guess, for a bunch of other videos, because it would take a whole lot to end up being able to show all the different things the Caucasians have actually come up with. A hilarious video I saw the other day was black inventions and one day without black inventions, and they tried the thing with the light bulb and the traffic light and peanut butter and everything again. It was hilarious how the guy made a video and he just totally debunked it and goes, no, there's a patent that predates, he's not even born yet. And they showed it, and most of the ones that we look at are really just an application for a patent that tries to do something new to something that had already been invented, and we didn't even use them. But you don't want to hear that narrative. And it's also, of course, after Caucasians spent so much trying to educate them and everything. It's not like somebody walked out of the bush with something that goes on a train or anything. That went from the other way, but of course you can't have that narrative. They just did it all on their own, like poof. Yeah, so in this 1860 census, so this is right before slavery's over, so where are the numbers at?
Based upon the 1860 census, only 1.4% of the population were slave owners, and this included black slave owners.
Oh no. So really it was like 1.2, 1.3, somewhere in between, and people try to push it and go 1.3. Oh wow. Well, the other remainder of that is black slave owners that owned land and everything. Hold on, that's not the narrative. Yeah, the other weird thing too is that this guy over here, his name is Anthony Johnson, on the right. He was the first person in America that ever actually owned a black person for life. Tell you a little quick story about it. He had a slave that he had for 7 years named John Casor, and the guy knew what the hell he was doing and basically was a foreman running his crap. And he didn't want to let him go. And so when it came up to 7 years and somebody offered him just down the road to pay him a whole lot to do it, and as opposed to being the indentured servitude, he was going to accept it. But then he went, Anthony Johnson here went, and you can look this up, he went to court and he demanded lifetime slavery because blacks, A, weren't really human, and that they were sold off as a commodity, not anything that's supposed to go up under Christianity whatsoever, and that therefore they could end up being lifetime slaves, and fought hard for it and actually won. And so that man there on the right ends up being the very first person that ever owned a black person in America. Oh man, that's not the narrative either, is it? Look it up, John Casor, C-A-S-O-R, yeah. Of course, blacks captured and sold their own off like unwanted people for beads and alcohol and or less. There's one story of one that he really wanted the cap that the guy had, or the hat, and he offered 5 slaves for a hat, things like that. Of course, they like nice things, but let's continue.
As a matter of fact, based upon the 1860 census, over 3,000 blacks own a total of 20,000 slaves.
Actually, that's a little off, and of course it's said in a ambiguous way here. It was way over 3,000, and 20,000 slaves. There's actually one man in South Carolina that was the largest slave owner in America at this time. Look it up. And he had like 18,000 slaves, but he mistreated them so bad, killed some of them, all kinds of stuff, to where they ended up having to make laws about it, the way he was mistreating all the people. And eventually he got them taken away from him because he couldn't stop, even with the laws and everything else that went on. And he was a black man. I've even seen blacks try to mention some of the stories of what happened by him, and turn around, whites were doing bad stuff like this and this and this, and it goes, that's hilarious. Where did you hear that from? Because that comes from a black slave master. There wasn't no black slave masters. Where's you been learning anything about this from? You're reading a book of lies. You might want to stop. Oh, I like this book. I'm sure you do. Let's continue.
So it's time to stop thinking that only white people own slaves. Black folks own slaves too.
In fact, where they all came from was blacks enslaving others. I'll give you a mental picture, see if you can figure it out. A white man grabs a big, heavy rope net and runs around through the jungle trying to catch black people who are real familiar about running around through that jungle. Yep, and the places that they turn around in America and say, look, we built this and this and that and the other, and it's like some of those were built with Islamics and other Portuguese and so on, and whenever you go to visit there, they'll tell you right there to your face, they were the ones that did all this. Yeah, we were capturing people and bringing it to them and sold them all off, and it just blows your mind. I've even had people try to deny it and do everything else. It's just disgusting.
So if you're looking for your reparations, I suggest you go find Laquifa and Tyrone and tell them to give you your money.
And continue.
Suggest you go find Laquifa and Tyrone and tell them to give you your money.
And continue.
I suggest you go find Laquifa and Tyrone and tell them to give you your money.
Try it. Try these ancient countries. You know, in 2019, when blacks were throwing this big fit and something special was going to happen to them in 2019 because of 400 years, because something in the Bible that doesn't mention them says it and all this, they were like, okay, it's time for your return home. And they set up these things that were like when you go to Hawaii as a luau and everything for blacks to come home. And there was only a few hundred of them that went, and very few even stayed and stuff. And it would just ended up becoming a mockery. And it's like, it's funny what they were just talking about here 6 months ago or a year ago, and here it comes, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, then nothing. And they don't want to leave America, and any of them went to visit it. Even Chief X went and visited, and he said after he was there for a while and started hearing the stuff, and it hit him all, the truth of it all, even though he had already read about it. And then the guy telling him the truth of it all, he broke down. And I can imagine, I myself might even break down in your favor, just sitting, having to listen to something like that versus the false narratives that are being told. Oh yeah, but there's all these symbols out, and breaking the chains and stuff, and these kids in this kids cartoon are about to talk about breaking the chains, and that they don't even want a mule and stuff, but they just want their freedom. And it's like, dude, you can leave at any time. We got boats lined up if you want them. We will take you back. You ought to look into what happened to Liberia the last time that happened. You know, Lincoln said they'd all have to go back, and in doing so, they set up Liberia for it. But that's the cannibal warlords of Liberia that you can hear about too. So, just something will go on.
And continue to earn reparations every moment we spend submerged in the systemic prejudice, racism, and white supremacy.
The reparation.
You don't continue to be owed any damn thing. The actual cost for domestication and all the pandering and things like that cost, let's just say, $1 more than whatever you come up with that you owe, and so you owe us $1. But now that we've thought about it, it's still going on, of course. And if we were in school right now, we're about 3rd or 4th grade at best. You may not think so, but the world can look at it. And so this is going to go on for quite a few more generations. Might as well start paying up on your part that it's owed, or you don't want to hear anything like that because you're busy thinking somebody's about to give you hundreds of thousands of dollars for something that never happened to you, and the people that are supposed to do it are the people that never did. In fact, if you want to roll back their time, they're the ones that saved you from your own people. and have actually turned around and propped you up more than any people in humanity, and we're still having issues like that. There's a reason for that, and I'll kind of get into it and touch upon it maybe later here in this video.
This thing is never going to happen, so get over it. Also, this is a lie. Michael Brown never said that. And this lie has been debunked over 1,000,000 times. Systemic prejudice is not a thing. And since you want to mention racism, are we going to talk about the growing racism against Asians and whites done by black folks?
There's a topic that needs to be talked about. In fact, we need to talk about all of these issues, and there need to be some movie of the week that gets shown every week and then every year in Black History Month and so on, to the point that you realize what the truth of it is, because you've just been caught up in a bunch of web of lies and then you act upon it. It's sad. It's sad to watch. Are you going to talk about how you're not racist? Some blacks have admitted, I'm watching this and we're the most racist people. I mean, gosh, and they act like they're entitled, and they go, white people, white people, white people. And you go, well, black people, oh, don't you dare, don't. It's hilarious, but you can't critique black people. That's the reason they're failing now, is that you can't tell them anything. You can't tell me nothing.
Are we going to pretend that's not happening? Oh yeah, and when was the last time you seen this take place? If you have to take an old black and white photo from the 40s and 50s and try to make that relevant to today, proves that you don't have any arguments.
But also you have a chip on your shoulder, and you're trained to have a chip on your shoulder that actually is a false narrative in the first place, and everything else, and it's just terrible to try to go on to or try to have any type of connection to whatsoever, but they try.
That America was founded with and still has not atoned for. Slaves built this country.
Again, America was not founded on slavery. European colonization began in 1492. The first 19 slaves weren't brought here until 1619.
And it was an accident from a ship that was going to South America anyhow, but it started it all. But those guys were free after 7 years and do everything just like everybody else. But you haven't heard that. And if you have, you try to consider it to be a lie because you want to believe in some other BS. Oh, it's disgusting to watch. Look how they're dressed now versus what they would have looked like whenever they were caught by their own people. But anyhow, let's continue with this.
It is a historical fact that America was not founded on slavery. It was
founded by Caucasians, and they had been here quite a few times, and of course we know the Vikings made it over here, but they only stopped up in Nova Scotia and Canada. Well, now we found out that's not true. There's a lot of artifacts running through America people still try to discount, but one thing that really kicked it in was all the Central and South American dogs that there are all directly related to people in Norwegian and Denmark and all of those areas, which was what we're looking at again here, and how all those dogs came from there. And that ends up going, well, okay, and then how is it Quetzalcoatl was supposed to be a bearded man with light hair and blue eyes and stuff, and they talk about it, Bizarro showed up and they thought he was him and so on, and they don't even grow facial hair at all. And how would Indians even know about blue eyes or blonde hair and make up this story if they didn't have something that was attached? But I guess that's for other videos. But let it be well known that Caucasians had been here before this. In fact, there are some leanings that show that they had been here for a lot longer than that in ancient times and connected to what ends up being the old artifacts of America. But let's continue.
Founded by Europeans for 127 years before the first Africans were brought to this land. So no, slaves did not build this country.
Not only field hands, but carpenters, masons, blacksmiths, musicians, inventors.
Wow. So they threw in a few things real quick there. All of those trades are from Caucasians, and if blacks got taught a trade, that's a good thing. And you should always for schooling and things like that, but Did y'all invent any of this stuff, or were you taught it, and therefore, oops, this kind of ruins your narrative trying to spit it out there, but you try anyhow, and it really falls apart. Now we're looking at George Washington Carver, and he didn't invent peanut butter either.
Cities from Jamestown to New Orleans to Banneker, Washington. 40 acres and a mule. We'll take the 40 acres. Keep the mule.
Keep the mule? You do understand the purpose of the mule, right? The mule was offered so that blacks can plow the land in order to build a farm. So how you going to get a 40 acres and no mule? This proves that people who are always looking for handouts are financially ignorant.
We made up that
Lie. You can't even prove that madness. Shut up. It's family.
We made up
Always looking for handouts are financially ignorant. Who are always looking for handouts are financially ignorant.
We made your families rich.
No, you didn't. You didn't make anybody's family rich. Stop spreading that lie. You can't even prove that madness. Shut up.
From the southern plantation heirs to the northern bankers to the New England ship owners, the founding fathers, former presidents, current senators,
the Illuminati, the New World Order,
slaves built this country.
Nope, no, they didn't. Also, how you going to forget about the Greeks, the Irish, the Italians, Hungarians, Poles, and other Slavic immigrants?
The word slave comes from Slav directly. And then there's the Barbary Coast, where the endemic Caucasians of North Africa that have been there forever were preyed upon by pirates and stuff. Yep, like a guy whose name turns into Redbeard himself. Yep. So we end up having a problem with that too. Well, Caucasians know it happened, don't like it, but we're okay with it. There's a big problem though, because other people can't get past it, even while being propped up and pandered to constantly. Shows you the reality of the situation, which here in a minute I might take a minute and focus on.
Who literally built this country, and they weren't even considered white during that time. Oh, and I also need to mention the Japanese, Chinese, and the Hispanics. You guys act like the only people who were here in America during this time were black slaves and white slave owners.
They want to pretend that everything's about white and black, and that they should claim that we blacks are anybody that has a tan darker than a sheet of paper, which is hilarious. When they show these kids again, I'm darker than most all of them except for one or two, and I'm Irish. So we can show that they're not taking straight black anymore, but I guess we'll talk about that later in the other issue. Let's continue.
Oh, and one more thing. Native Americans also owned slaves.
Whoops.
We had Tubman, Turner,
Frederick D.
Didn't they say Lincoln freed the slaves?
When slaves were men.
And
Harriet Tubman, oh, that's that Underground Railroad. That was all made by whites. The only reason she made it the first time, or back again, or anything like that, was because of Caucasians making the Underground Railroad. Then he said something about Frederick Douglass. Well, Frederick Douglass is famous for a few statements, one of which is that there are certain people that want to live life like a victim and pretend that that's the way that they should live. And so we can see right off the bat, way back when, that one of them snapped to and got everything going on and realized it, and then realized, oh man, blacks are trying to play the victim. And it's still going on to this day. At any moment that they can try to point it out, it's a victim mentality.
and women, and only we can free ourselves.
I don't understand this part. Yes, slaves were men and women. Like, yeah.
And wait, hit the next statement too, that only we can free ourselves. And it's like, well, that's not how it happened. You've been free for a long time. Are you still mentally caught up on a plantation somehow in your mind? That would be a mental issue with you that doesn't go on. You're constantly being propped up and you're still trying to ragdoll and flop yourself like a victim. It's disgusting, but here we go. Hopefully one day we'll be able to look upon this, but it's going to be a few generations before they'll be able to look back and go, damn. And hopefully there's some type of respect given. It's like, oh man, we put y'all through everything, like a hell child somehow in your own house or something off of it too. But I get the feeling that due to the way blacks are, they don't want to admit that ever. They still want to stay with y'all gave us hell. And it's like, We gave you a place to live and a chance. You were fixing to have to play chase me, eat me with those guys that had you if you didn't get bought. Let's continue.
Well, is that a surprise to you guys?
Emancipation is not freedom. Jim Crow, segregation, redlining, public schools, feeding private prisons, where we become slaves again.
None of this makes you a slave. And redlining, public schools, and private prisons are not exclusive to only blacks. So stop lying. Also, you not exclusive to only blacks. So stop lying. Also, you need to show this sign to black people, not whites. Now, don't make me to show this sign to black people, not whites. Now, don't make me pull out them FBI statistics.
You definitely don't want that. When people pull them out, if they don't twist it in their favor and try to act like, well, if you're only 13% and these other guys are 64%, so they should be doing 6 times the amount of whatever crime it is and stuff. And they go, well, it's close. And I go, yeah, but if you times it times 6, you do 9 times the amount of these violent crimes. And you want to act like that's supposed to be accepted. It's terrible. And when they add it all up and then try to average it all, not just one certain crime or another, it ends up being like 58% out of 12%. That's even actually supposed to be a bad thing if you mention it. Whereas when you go victim, 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 is that a bad thing you mention it? Oh yeah, because it's a false narrative, but people want that. Come on, have you pandered today?
Celebrate Juneteenth for the umpteenth time.
I grew up in an all-black community in Washington, D.C., went to all-black public schools, and even graduated from a historical black university. Not one time did we celebrate Juneteenth. So since it wasn't a thing back then, it's not going to be a thing with me now.
But it's going to be a thing with black people. In fact, you saw them go, for the umpteenth time. And it's like, well, y'all invented it not too long ago, or to celebrate it. People didn't used to try to celebrate the fact that they used to be slaves. But now, due to the I as a victim mentality, you get them to where, here's a point where I get to also make whites pander. Pander, 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 pander. At what point do you look back at this and go, oh no, that's totally showing white supremacy and things off that, just on the fact that they have to do that and pander to us and prop us up and have done everything for us, and everything around us is all created by whites, and da-da-da, oh, you can't hear that. I can't hear you, I can't hear you, I can't hear you.
Moving on.
Our account is still outstanding, because this country was built on slavery, which means slaves built this country.
If your account is still outstanding, that means you need to get a job. Oh, and no, slaves did not build this country. Means you need to get a job. Oh, and no, slaves did not build this country.
And we demand our 40 acres.
Looky how light she is, and what's that good hair? I mean, is that a hair hat or not? Now, we know that the host here, that Donna Summer looking, is wearing a hair hat and stuff, and I guess we'll give her a pass because at least she's trying to educate you on the truth of everything. In a minute, she's going to talk about that blonde one's hair hat, doesn't talk about this one and so on, but I guess you'd have to say this one is pretty much admixed enough to where they got that good hair, y'all. Yeah, she's like, oh, Kamala Harris, the slave master's grandkids. Oh, wow.
And a mule. You can keep the mule.
Keep the 40.
We're taking our freedom.
You're taking your freedom, so we're good? You don't want your 40 acres. You definitely don't want the mule. All you want is your freedom, right? Well, since slavery is illegal here in the United States of America, and you're already free, America doesn't owe you a damn thing.
In fact, all the propping up and everything, there's a fee for all of that, for educating you and going through everything. If you want us to develop a fee for it because you have a fee for something else, believe me, it's going to hit over that number, and then you'll end up owing us, and then we'll start compounding it every year because it's not over yet. We need to talk about that. So maybe this reparation crap and you owe me money because I never did anything and you never did either.
And I'm so glad we worked this out. Glad we had this talk. Oh, and by the way, is anyone going to call out LaQuandra over here for culturally appropriating an overweight white woman? No, we're not gonna call with no accountability. No.
Well, she's not going to mention her hair hat too, but we have that situation. There's even black guys that are wearing hair hats and so on too. And listen, here's another thing. I don't want to ever hear that braids were mine or so on off of it either. And I guess I'm fixing to show you why. She's pretty much through with the idea that goes on here. Let's finish off.
Oh, okay. Well, that concludes today's history lesson. Hope you.
Well, thank you, Tree. Thank you. Y'all need to check out if you're interested in her channel here or whatever. I don't know any of her other videos. I just saw this, and as she went through it, I was just more and more amazed that she was willing to share the truth of everything to black people, regardless if she's wearing contacts that aren't a natural color for her or a hair hat or so on. Anyhow, hey, she kind of looks like Donna Summer, don't she? So let's look at something that'll show you the truth of the reality, the way that it all went down. And I don't want to hear any whining and crying. And you can look up this just as easy as anybody else. So we can look at this Iwu Aliru skull that's been found in Yorubaland in present-day Nigeria. It dates to 13,000 years old, or 9100 BC. And it's an archaic human, or it has admixture to this point. They're not sure. They try to put it like there, but what it really is somebody that actually was found here, basically, and can't really show it too easy here, but that's a small cranial vault. Man, I've got to pull that down so you can see it. I think it's probably too small. If I small this whole thing out like this, it's gonna be too small, but you can tell here it has a low cranial vault. In fact, it still has a small brain, and it is a archaic human. And what blew archaeologists away was the fact that it's still a Homo erectus type species somehow that lived on way later than we look at that chart on the wall and try to say, well, here's this, here's that, then eventually gets Homo erectus, there's a couple more, and then Homo sapiens, and then Homo sapiens sapiens. And yet at 9100 BC they have this. Well, worse than that, it goes all the way down to 4400 BC before they have a larger cranial vault, which still ends up being 13 to 15% smaller than anybody else on the planet too. So let's look at this. Asselar man, Asselar. And when we look at Asselar man, he's a late Stone Age skeleton or whatever off of it. Asselar specimen is dated to 6400 BP or 4400 BC, making it no older than the Holocene. Well, that's the end of the last ice age. This is way after that. So they tell you that Asselar is one, if not the earliest known anatomical modern human skeleton with a negroid phenotype. Living in sub-Saharan Africa, old fossils with similar morphology have been found near Khartoum, dated between 8 and 5000 BC, but they're the small Homo erectus brained ones too. So what happened here? Well, what actually happened here is somebody who had genetics of E1B1, who actually correlates to a lot of the Berbers and the people of ancient North Africa, Caucasians that are endemic to there, finally made it down the coast and ended up finding them and bred with them. And this was a one-way trip on that breeding and where it went. And apparently the reason that E1B1 has taken over so much, because whenever they started having larger brain children, those picked up on it and decided to turn around and take over all the other black people. So when we try to talk about black people and you say like, oh, the people back in Africa are more black than us, and when black people, whenever you try to explain this to them, they go, oh, that's from slavery, whenever they raped us. And it's like, no, everybody in Africa, in the area we're talking about, is 22 to 38% Caucasian admix. That's where that E1B1 comes from. And so blacks with a Caucasian admix is what took over all of that down there. And that happened and started about 4400 BC, which they tell you clearly here is the oldest modern human with a negroid phenotype. So that's totally different than they try to say, or a lot of people say or act ambiguous about, isn't it? That's the reality of what happened. Yeah. Anyhow, like, share, and subscribe, and let me know what you think downstairs. And really, this is more about that stupid show that's somehow on Disney that used to be about kid shows and timeless shows that you could show your grandkids and so on, and all of a sudden now it's about crap that we don't even want to get a copy of. And I'm sure black people will get it, but every one of us, including black people, are going to look back at this as the age of pandering and a bunch of BS and sad narratives and lies, and you're going to try to grow your kid up, watch this show over and over again and get all riled up about a lie and then act upon it later. Because that's what ends up happening with sad, racist lies like what get pushed even in a modern day. Peace.